Because you realize the human body, the human genome, has tons of what they call junk DNA. Now, what does that mean? It's DNA that either seems to not have any purpose, or else we haven't figured out what it is yet. A significant part of the human genome is this junk DNA. And what the plan is to have these luciferin genes take over all that junk DNA. So instead of there just being one, there might be hundreds. And what's going to happen then? You see, I personally, this is my only belief, and I can't support this except just it makes sense, that before Adam fell, there was no junk DNA. Everything he had was working on all cylinders. Because, you know, Yahweh don't make junk. You know? But when he fell, then a lot of his abilities went away. His mind became darkened and clouded by sin. You know, the death entered the world. And what do you think the impact of this is going to be if all this fallen DNA is mingled in massive quantities with people? So, you know, when you consider the nasty stuff that is already in vaccines, you know, and if you've heard my medical conspiracy video, you know I kind of get on the tub and thump against vaccines, but I believe they're extremely dangerous and that they're being used to introduce all sorts of nasty stuff into the general population. But this, to me, is a very possible thing because it's more subtle. I mean, everybody and their brother nowadays knows about mark of the beast. Yeah, you get this tattoo on your arm, you get this tattoo on your forehead. Everybody who saw, remember those movies that came out in the 60s? You know, if you were, I mean, I saw them after I was saved years later, but, you know, I forget what they were called, The Thief in the Night, and there was like 3 or 4, and they're kind of cheesy looking today because they look kind of dated and everything. But, you know, they were a good effort at the time. And, you know, but everybody knows about that. A lot of people aren't going to fall for that or else they won't care. This is scary enough and subtle enough they might very well care. Magical seduction. By now, hundreds or perhaps thousands of women have been impregnated by the B'nai Elohim. And I've met a few of their offspring over the years. We've ministered to a few of them. And guess what? They can be saved just like everybody else. They can be set free just like everybody else. Just because they had bad parentage. That doesn't matter. Because as long as they have human DNA, as long as they have human free will, they can still come to the cross just like everybody else. Met this one young lady. She had already been set free, but she was the product of a fallen angel union with a high-level witch, Satanist. And the only way you could tell her is anything a little bit different about her. She was very pallid, very pale, very black hair, which isn't that uncommon. But if she took off her dark glasses, have you ever looked into the eyes of a goat? They have kidney bean-shaped pupils. And that's what her eyes were golden. And she had no eyelashes, and her pupils were kidney-shaped, not round like normal human beings. So she was saving up her money at the time to get special contact lenses. But until then, she just had to wear dark glasses whenever she went out in public. But she loved Yeshua with all of her heart. And she was so grateful that he had set her free from all of that. And we've had several young people like that. Most of them, you know, in their late teens, early 20s. So don't lose heart. Even though some of this stuff seems pretty over the top and pretty scary stuff, hell hath no hurt that heaven cannot heal. Just remember that. Realize that our understanding of technology is very limited compared to the B'nai Elohim. These are beings of incredibly cold intellect, incredibly corrupt intellect, and they are utterly without mercy. Behind the scenes, both in science and technology, they and their human stooges have been hard at work introducing incredible technologies, things that are decades ahead of what we're allowed to hear about in the news. As part of our own magical training, we were taught how to turn on some of the genes in our body that were part of junk DNA. Now, I know I had no idea, that was, 20, 30 years ago, how that has impacted us. I've renounced all of that stuff. I've repented of all of it, but you never know. In my particular case, for example, oddly enough, my blood type changed. My Rh factor, I used to be, I can never remember which is which, O negative, and now I'm O positive. It's one or the other. And that's supposed to be impossible. But yet, I gave blood once when I was in college, and I had one blood type, and I gave blood when I was in seminary after doing all of this weird stuff, and had a totally different blood type. So I think, yes, I've probably been tinkered with a little bit over the years, but I can't prove it. I don't have any memories of anything other than what I've already shared. There's been dark hints of this stuff in the past. Occultists and authors like Aleister Crowley and H.P. Lovecraft wrote of these mysteries more than 80 years ago. Crowley talked about this being that came to him. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me talk about Lovecraft first. Lovecraft was a novelist who was a very strange individual. He never married. He lived with these two maiden aunts as kind of a recluse in Providence, Rhode Island, and he wrote these very weird stories. All of them are very disturbing. They're not like your typical horror novels, because they were written like 80 years ago when we were in a much more genteel society, but yet they give you the willies. And he talked about things like intermarriage between monsters and human beings, about, if you've ever read The Shadow over Innsmouth, which I don't recommend, it's about this small seaport town of Innsmouth, fictional, in Massachusetts, where there's a Masonic lodge where they worship Dagon, the god of the sea. And these strange, shambling, frog-like creatures come out of the sea and mate with human women, and they produce offspring. And there's other stories that he wrote of similar vein. And what's interesting is everybody thinks, oh, well, this is all fiction. Well, one of the things Lovecraft supposedly created was the great elder god, or the great old one, Cthulhu. Remember Cthulhu? He's the being we called out of Lake Michigan just 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. My time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Hallelujah. Anyway, God, I can't believe it's been 30 years since we did that. Anyhow, so is this stuff real or not? Let me share something. I read a thesis that was written by a scholar out in the East Coast who made a study of Lovecraft's background, his ancestry. He discovered that Lovecraft's grandfather was an Egyptian Freemason. That's the same kind of high-level Freemasonry that I was in, the 90th degree Masonry thing. And, yeah, believe it or not, I was a 90th degree Mason. That's another videotape. Anyway, and they think that maybe he had a trunk of these horrible forbidden books that Lovecraft talks about. And when he died, Lovecraft inherited those things, because Lovecraft spent his life in terror. He would never go near the sea. He would never go underground, because he writes about these beings like Dagon and Cthulhu that are living under the sea. And then he writes about these beings that live under the earth, that crawl like giant worms that consume people and digest them very slowly, like Schnoebelen. Just creepy, creepy stuff. And then there's always the crawling chaos in Nyarlathotep. And then this is stuff that's 80 or 90 years old. And this guy is more powerful and more popular now than he ever was in his lifetime. And he was writing about all this stuff, and now it's happening. I mean, strange things are coming out of the sea and breeding with human beings, because some of these UFO beings, some of these UFOs come from under the sea. Don't forget what it talks about in the book of Job. It talks about dead souls under the sea. And it's not talking about just dead people, because, a soul by definition can't be dead, because the soul is the nefesh, the life principle. Then we have good old Mr. Crowley. Oh, wait, forgot about that. We got to talk about Crowley. I forgot what the slide was. Crowley open doorways and